The format is that Raheel Raza is going to speak first, followed by Majid Nawaz and Douglas Murray. Raheel Raza is an award-winning Pakistani-Canadian journalist, now based in Toronto, where her book, Their Jihad, Not My Jihad, was published in 2012. She's also the president of the Council for Muslims Facing Tomorrow, which campaigns to promote the principles of individual rights and freedoms among Muslims. Before she speaks, we're going to play a short video narrated by Raheel, which was produced by the Clarion Project. The video is 14 minutes long. It's called By the Numbers and deals with radical ideology in the Muslim world.
Almost every day, we are told that Islamist terrorism has nothing to do with Islam.
Muslims are peaceful and tolerant people and have nothing whatsoever to do with terrorism.
Al-Qaeda's cause is not Islam. ISIL is not Islamic.
And we are told that Muslims reject the extremists.
The overwhelming majority of Muslims reject that interpretation of Islam. It's very important for us to align ourselves with the 99.9% of Muslims who are looking for the same thing we're looking for.
But is it true that 99.9% of Muslims don't support extremism? What would you say if scientific polls by major research organizations have repeatedly shown a very different picture? I'm Raheel Raza. I'm a Sunni Muslim, and for the past 20 years, I've dedicated my life to speaking out against the rising threat of radical Islam. When there is a disease or a virus, it can't be treated unless you identify the problem. So we have to call it what it is, and it is violent, radical, extremist Islamism. This is not an easy topic to discuss, but in light of the fact that most of the terrorism in the world today involves Muslims in one way or another, and because it directly affects our lives and security, I think that we need to be able to have an open, honest, and fact-based conversation about that.
Let's be honest. Islam has a problem today. There is a cancer of extremism within Islam today.
This is not a conversation about Islam. It's a conversation about the growing threat of radical Islam and how it affects us all. And that conversation begins now. Our society has evolved to a point where we can have a civilized debate about almost anything. Anything except what may be the most important issue of our time, the rise of radical Islam.
Liberals somehow feel worried that they're going to be called racist if they criticize people of the Muslim faith.
This fear of being called a racist has caused many people to act against their better judgment, and it may have even cost innocent lives.
At least 14 killed, another 17 wounded. It happened in San Bernardino, a city
in San Bernardino, California, 2 Muslim terrorists who had pledged allegiance to ISIS killed at least 14 people.
Inside Farouk's house, police found a virtual bomb-making laboratory with smokeless powder and remote-control cars.
But a few weeks before the attack, some neighbors apparently noticed suspicious activity but didn't call the police. Why?
That man that was interviewed said he never said anything because he didn't want to be seen as racially profiling.
Did political correctness cost people their lives? It's hard to say for sure, but we do know that it's become harder and harder to speak about these things without being told we are racist.
Freedom of speech, freedom to practice any religion you want without fear of violence. These are liberal principles that liberals applaud for. But then when you say, in the Muslim world, this is what's lacking, then they get upset.
It's an ugly thing to say. It's gross. It's racist. How about the more than 1 billion people who aren't fanatical, who don't punch women, who just want to go to the store,
wait a second. Wait a second.
Wait a second. Any of the things that you're saying all Muslims
wait a second.
stereotyping.
Wait a second.
Things and you painting the whole group religion with that.
Well, I'm a Muslim, and I don't need Ben Affleck defending me and my religion. I appreciate it, but I don't need celebrities defending me from talk show hosts. I need to be defended from the radicals in my own religion who want me dead. Radical Islamists who behead people, set people on fire, pour battery acid on women's faces, murder people in the name of my God.
فقسما بأمر الله لندكن أمريكا وبعقرها في واشنطن بإذن الله تعالى.
Radicals who seek to take over the world in the name of my religion.
We need to establish the domination of Islam.
We believe that the Sharia will be implemented worldwide.
سوف تستعيد زعامة العالم.
So let's get real and look at some numbers. Today, there are around 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. In fact, Islam is the world's fastest growing religion, and according to Pew Research, it will surpass Christianity this century. Now, obviously, not all Muslims are radical, but a certain percentage are. Sam Harris helps break it down for Ben Affleck and for all of us.
As you say, we have 1.5, 1.6 billion Muslims. Now,
second biggest religion in the world, a quarter.
Well, Ben, let me unpack this. Let me unpack this for you.
Please do.
We have just imagine some concentric circles here. You have at the center, you have jihadists. These are people who wake up in the morning wanting to kill apostates, wanting to die trying. They believe in paradise. They believe in martyrdom.
That's the first circle of radicals. Violent jihadists like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Hezbollah, Hamas, and various lone wolves. These are the jihadists who murder people in San Bernardino, Texas, Paris, London, Delhi, Jerusalem, Ottawa, Madrid, Nairobi, Boston, and of course New York. These are the horrible bad people, as Ben Affleck said. So how many violent jihadists are there? There are anywhere between 40,000 to 200,000 Muslims involved in fighting for ISIS across the world. That's just ISIS. And it doesn't include the hundreds of thousands of jihadis fighting for Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and other groups. But the thing about terrorism is that it only takes a handful of terrorists to do serious damage and even change the way a society operates.
Explosives hidden in shoes and other improvised bombs are an active, ongoing threat.
And with the refugee crisis, the number of ISIS jihadis operating in the West is also set to increase.
The huge numbers are a challenge to security, with many arriving refusing to identify themselves upon arrival in Europe.
This is the ideal situation for ISIS to penetrate several countries in Europe.
And according to reports, the mastermind of the Paris attacks snuck into Europe claiming to be a refugee.
He boasted of being able to travel freely between Europe and Syria.
And while radical Islamists are sneaking into Europe, twice as many British Muslims are fighting for ISIS than are fighting in the British armed forces.
In the gruesome video showing James Foley's murder, many were shocked to hear his executioner speaking with a British accent.
This is James Wright Foley.
America is not immune to this danger.
Today, federal prosecutors say a man trained in Syria returned to the United States to launch a terrorist attack here at home.
According to U.S. Homeland Security, there have been over 122 U.S. terrorist cases involving homegrown violent jihadists since 9/11. Fortunately, many of them have been thwarted by law enforcement. That's the first circle. Murderous, violent jihadists in Europe, in America, and around the world. But what about the next circle outside of them?
Outside of them, we have Islamists. These are people who are just as convinced of martyrdom and paradise and wanting to foist their religion on the rest of humanity, but they want to work within the system. They're not going to blow themselves up on a bus. They want to change governments. They want to use democracy against itself.
Islamists want many of the same things as the jihadists. It's just that their tactics differ. So instead of engaging in terror themselves, they use the political and cultural system to further their aims. Take Gaza, for example. In 2006, Palestinians voted Hamas into power. Hamas is a radical terrorist group that used democracy to gain legitimacy and political power. Also included in this circle are a large percentage of Egyptians who in 2012 elected the Muslim Brotherhood into power.
Egypt has a new president this evening, Mohammed Morsi, a member of the Muslim Brotherhood.
The Muslim Brotherhood was formed in Cairo in 1928. It's known as the progenitor of modern political Islam and has a stated goal of establishing a global caliphate or Islamic state run in accordance with Sharia law.
Morsi wants to impose Islamic law, limit the rights of women. His party is not pro-American.
Now, while the Muslim Brotherhood is primarily a political organization, it has spawned many terrorist groups around the world, including Al-Qaeda, Hamas, and others. Although distinct from the groups we just described, there is an organization here in North America called CARE, which the Department of Justice said is or was a member of the U.S. Muslim Brotherhood. CARE presents itself as a moderate civil rights group representing the interests of Muslims in America. Yet, when you look a little closer, many disturbing things start to emerge.
A controversial American Muslim group is facing new charges of ties to Islamic terrorism.
The United Arab Emirates has just listed CARE as a terrorist organization. ISIS and Al-Qaeda are also on that list.
And in the United States, CARE was named as an unindicted co-conspirator in a major terror funding trial. Groups like CARE try to silence people like myself and others who dare to speak out about radical Islam. Case in point, a film that I was in featuring 9 women who spoke out against barbaric treatment of women by radical Islamists got shut down.
Why would CARE want to silence this film?
That's what they do. They try to shut down debate by crying Islamophobia, even at Muslims like me. That's the second circle. Now, this next circle is the largest of them all, and this is very disturbing. The Muslims in this circle are certainly not like ISIS, and they're not working to overthrow governments like the Muslim Brotherhood. But they do hold beliefs and practices that no doubt will seem radical to you and me.
They hold views about human rights and about women, about homosexuals, that are deeply troubling.
Who are they? What are their beliefs? In 2013, Pew Research released a comprehensive study based on interviews with thousands of Muslims in 39 countries. It reported that in countries like Afghanistan, Egypt, and Jordan, the vast majority of Muslims surveyed, between 79 to 86%, believe that those who leave the Muslim faith should be executed. Do you know anyone who has left their faith? Do you think they should be executed? Do you think that that's a radical belief? If we were to take the average from all the Muslims surveyed around the world, we end up with an average of 27% who believe that apostates should be executed. 27% of those surveyed, that equals 237 million people. Did you know that 39% of all Muslims in the countries surveyed believe that honor killings can be a justifiable punishment for a woman who has had pre- or extramarital sex? Do you think that's a radical belief? That radical belief is held by over 345 million Muslims. These studies paint a picture of an Islamic world that is increasingly out of step with the modern world. When it comes to support for terrorism and jihad, these are the numbers for young Muslims aged 18 to 29 in Western countries. 42% of French Muslims, 35% of British Muslims, and 26% of American Muslims believe suicide bombings against non-Muslims can be justified. This is the next generation of Muslim speaking. A majority of Muslims surveyed, 53%, said they want Sharia or Islamic law to be the law of the land in Muslim majority countries. Of those who said they want Sharia to be the law of the land, over 52% said they support whippings and cutting off of hands of thieves. This comes to about 281 million people. Do you think that's a radical belief? And 51% say they're in favor of stoning spouses if they're unfaithful, which equals 289 million people. Of course, not every Muslim believes in these things, but hundreds of millions do. The numbers are right here for all to see. It's time for an honest conversation about one of the most important issues of our time. By silencing the debate about radical Islamist beliefs, we abandon our own core beliefs of truth, free speech, and tolerance, and we abandon human rights in favor of political correctness. Together, we have begun the conversation. Now it's time for you to have your say. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, especially because we are the last panel of the day and usually people leave, so I'm very happy to see that most of you are still here. Gives us hope. I wanted to show you this documentary because I wanted you to get an idea of how deeply embedded this radical ideology is today, at present, among believers. And But when we speak of Islam and Muslims, there was a time when Muslims did not reject secularism. Theologically, the Quran, which is the holy book of Muslims, does not give the concept of a state. It speaks of moral and ethics. It's more concerned about polity than it is about law. We also have a precedent of the Prophet Muhammad, who had gone from Mecca to Medina. In Medina, he set up a constitution. Then when he came back and conquered Mecca, he had the opportunity to make that the state. That was the place that housed the Holy Kaaba, but he did not. He kept the constitution in Mecca. So in some of our understanding, that was a separation of mosque and state. And of course, he advised his followers to have the belief of follow the laws of the land where you live, unless you are forced to do something that is against the faith. And historically, under the Ottomans and in Spain, Islam did not reject secularism. And we know that Indian Muslims have also largely embraced secularism. But Orthodox and fundamentalist Muslims have always rejected secularism as being anti-Islam. Their only definition of secularism is that it is against religion, and in their case, especially against Islam. Maulana Maududi, the founder of the Jamaat-e-Islami, which is the Pakistani Muslim Brotherhood, said, and I quote, "Those who participate in secular politics are raising a flag of revolt against Allah, God, and His Messenger." And a lot of people follow that belief. Today, there is great tension within the Muslim world in terms of secularism, because as you saw, there are a large percentage of Muslims who have been convinced that the only way they can exist is under Islamic law, although there are only 4 Muslim countries that actually have Sharia law, which are Iran, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, and Sudan. But the rest of the Muslim world has at times followed secular law. In Pakistan, where I come from, they follow the British common law. Thank you for the remnant of that after colonization. They also do allow Sharia and tribal law. But I'll tell you how ironical it is that in Pakistan, for example, a Muslim couple may go to a civil court and get a divorce, and it is accepted, that divorce that is performed in the civil court is accepted in the religious courts. But right here in the United Kingdom in London, the civil court divorce is not accepted by the religious court. So the couple then has to go to the Sharia Council or the Sharia court, which your country has been so kind to offer 100 Sharia courts to the Muslims living here under the umbrella of multiculturalism, which then gives them an alternate. So, this goes back, of course, in time to where the lack of secularization began, where the rise of religious identity, the rise of religiosity began in the Muslim world. And it was in the late 1970s, while Ayatollah Khomeini was in exile in France, instead of reading about French philosophers, he was studying the mandate of the Muslim Brotherhood. And at the same time, the oil embargo had allowed Saudi Arabia to flex its muscles. So what we see today, in essence, is the result of a 30-year turf war between Saudi Arabia and the Sunnis on one hand and Iran on the other hand for supremacy and hegemony over the Muslim world. Now, to achieve this, both parties have channeled billions of petrodollars into their ideology abroad because they are insistent that every Muslim needs to follow this certain boxed path that they have created. And what is this ideology? This ideology is definitely not secular. It stems from 3 major sources. It either stems from the Muslim Brotherhood, or it stems from the Wahhabi Salafi ideology, or Khomeiniism. And neither one of them supports any kind of separation of mosque and state. They want to promote Islam as the solution and wish to impose Sharia law on Muslims, not only those living in Muslim lands, but those now living in the West as well. So there have been many moves to impose a Sharia law. As a Canadian, I'm proud to tell you that about 7 years ago, when this proposition came up in Canada, the women's rights groups, the liberal groups, all together lobbied long and hard, and we actually got rid of that loophole within the Canadian law that allowed for arbitration. So we did not allow Sharia councils to exist, and that has been a great, great move in the right direction. So if we leave aside the Muslim world, where they have a choice to follow Sharia law or not, let's look at Muslims in the West. And I have to tell you that I am an eternal optimist, and I work as a Muslim reformist with my friend Majid Nawaz and the Quilliam Foundation. And we definitely believe that the reform can only come if there is separation of state and religion. And that is an essential component of any reform to take place, as you saw in the Christian world as well. I also believe that Muslims in the West might have adjusted to secularism had they not been given a choice to follow Islamic law. So why is it that they were given this on a platter? I know in the case of the United Kingdom, your Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, made a statement in which he felt that it was okay to allow minority communities, and minority communities under this umbrella of monoculturalism were looked upon as a monolith. They were not no individual thought was considered. This was a block, that Muslims are a block, they're all alike, so they should have Sharia law. And I believe in my readings in this fantastic book by a Yemeni-Swiss scholar, Dr. Elham Manea, has just published a book called Sharia and Women, which is very little about women in Sharia, but it speaks about what has happened in the United Kingdom. She has studied and investigated the Sharia councils, the cases that have come under it, and how all this came together. And she says that she believes that it was because Rowan Williams was sensitive to the fact and afraid that the Christianity would be subsumed by secularism. So he felt that if this was offered to other minority communities, they may somehow be able to save Christianity. So what I'm trying to say here is that Western governments and governance play a huge role in whether Muslims integrate or not. This offer of a second set of laws, of a second set of legal rules should not even be offered. One law for all, I believe there is a movement here in the United Kingdom, which I support because I am a secular Muslim. And so we need to follow one law. And how hard is it for the government to say this to minorities, to immigrants coming in, that we have just one law and this is what you should follow? I mean, all Western countries are struggling with this, but it has to come not just from the grassroots level. It has to also come from the top down. I'm not going to take up too much more of your time because you have a document on your tables about the reform movement and what my organization does, and we partner with anyone who follows the same mandate as we do. We believe the reform, the seeds have been sown, but it can only happen once we get the essential separation of religion and state. Thank you so much.